This exhibition is entitled Golem Dybbuk, discussing a female interpretation of the Yiddish folklore stories of the Golem and the Dybbuk. Golem, a man made out of clay, built by a rabbi to do his bidding, a protective force. The Dybbuk, a mischievous or malicious spirit that has been wronged in life, of a dead person that takes over the body of a living person. Once the minion of rabbis comes together and exercises that Dybbuk, that woman is not seen as being responsible for her actions. The woman is not at fault for being infected or infested by this spirit that's holding host. The beginning of this exhibition, the drawing aspect was all on-site, as an on-site installation, painted onto the blank wall of the gallery, which that idea of the white canvas, white piece of paper, blank wall, I really hate that. And so I stared down the wall for about an hour before actually beginning. I have it in here. I love this sketchbook. Sewing Dybbuks onto each other for protection. Sewing Dybbuks for protection. Even having all of the drawings and sketches in my arsenal to have a reference point is intimidating to start from zero in that way, and a challenge for me in my work because I traditionally work with ceramic sculpture in 3 dimensions. Even though the clay is this malleable thing, it starts as something. In my work, I'm interested in dealing with elements of the 2-dimensional with the background in painting and the 3-dimensional of sculpture, and the interplay between the two, and the space that resides between the 2-dimensional and the 3-dimensional. What happens when you take a 2-dimensional drawing and have it exist in space, that you can walk around and experience that from all different sides? And if those paintings or drawings are existing within 3-dimensional space, they don't need to reside within that square or rectangle of the canvas. They can come into being within their own shapes and thicknesses, and I think that that's I like the interplay between the two. When I look at all of the strong influences that guide my work or the ideas behind the imagery, I think that it often comes back to literary influences, that of magical realism. My background is of Eastern European descent, Polish. Both grandparents are survivors, and the Yiddishkeit in the family, the stories of Yiddish folklore was very prevalent. Yiddish being spoken within both generations of my family, grandparents and parents. I think that there's that idea of fairy tale, folklore, magical realism. For me, they in many ways can be one and the same. In that way, coming back to those stories and those things that interest me was a natural progression. In a lot of the work that I do, dealing with that idea of magical realist imagery is not necessarily always centered on these Yiddish folktales, but they do center on an idea of something overtaking, of things changing in that way. Looking at parasitic plant forms like kudzu vines, cordyceps fungus, thinking of people looking down and finding these sprouting blooms and green filials erupting from them, creating this hybridized form. I think that I see a correlation between those two ideas. As well, the idea of these plant forms overtaking, holding host, either in a parasitic or symbiotic way, and the idea of the Dybbuk taking over. Taking those ideas and those traditional stories, the play written by S. Ansky of the Dybbuk, and reinterpreting them to think about this hybridized version of a golem/Dybbuk entity that the female figure will sew on to themselves as this protective layer, as this protective garment, thinking of them as a force for good, not malicious or mischievous. Not necessarily that a Dybbuk is is a bad person, but they were somebody that was wronged in life. And I listened to that idea, but the thing that I'm most interested in, that central idea, is something that Rachel Elior talks about in her book, Dybbuk and Jewish Women. And she discusses the idea that all of these stories of the Dybbuks traditionally taking over women, and then having this voice. Perhaps they were peoples that were disenfranchised in certain situations, like in the story of the Dybbuk, in an arranged marriage, in a forced marriage, or in other situations, incest, abuse, and having in no way having a voice to speak out. That wouldn't have been acceptable, but as a vessel purely for this wronged spirit, they then have a way to communicate.